But the first people who were receiving lobotomies were women who the husband said she wasn't listening to me.
If you have ever wondered how somebody can be controlled without realizing it, this episode is for you. Coercive control doesn't start with rules. It starts with suggestions, right? With little comments that sound like opinions. But we're going to break down what kind of control kind of hides in love, why people don't see it, how it just breaks your confidence and your sense of self. And I really can't think of anybody better than Dr. Cocchiola to talk with us about this. I am so glad you're here. Can you talk to us a little bit about your experience, who you are, and what makes you so passionate about this particular topic?
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. I love this conversation. We could have it all day long, I think. People don't realize this about me. They think I just am like new to this world. I've been doing this since I was 19. I've been a domestic abuse, sexual assault, crisis counselor for I was a volunteer for a local agency for over 35 years. I worked in child welfare. And I was a school social worker and went on for my master's in social work and met my husband when I was 16 and fell madly in love, as many 16-year-olds do. And it didn't show up with a punch in the face. And the abuse was slow and insidious. It's like a slow burn. Over time, I began to lose who I really was. And then you have beautiful children, and the last thing you want to do is break up your family, or you think maybe it's you. You know, you said suggestions. You're absolutely right. It doesn't start off like overtly. It can for some people, but oftentimes it starts off very covertly. But it really is about coercive control, is about one person exerting power and control over another person and diminishing who they are, their personhood. Dr. Stark used to call it a liberty crime. And to be really clear for your listeners, if you've suffered physical violence, it's still coercive control. A lot of people are saying it's invisible abuse, it's hidden abuse. No, what we know is that abuse doesn't show up with a punch in the face. Abuse shows off over time. Abusers are going to use all kinds of strategies to abuse, and some of them, not all, may turn to physical violence or sexual violence.
You're absolutely right. You know, I remember this moment, and it was, I think maybe like a year or two ago, it wasn't even that long ago, where I was describing that my ex-abuser was not controlling at all. And, you know, like I had the freedom to do what I wanted, wear what I wanted, go where I wanted. And I realized, I was actually speaking with Dr. Carrie McAvoy, and she was like, actually, what you're describing is control in a different way. It was through praise. And I realized that's a version of coercive control. And I started to realize that it was sort of like this good girl thing. Like, I love that you're not the type of woman that goes out gallivanting with her friends. And I realized that there was still some level of control to that. Or even if I was out, you know, the expectation that I answer my phone and he could call as many times as he wanted to or text as many times as he wanted to, there was a consequence if I didn't answer. So sure, I could do whatever I wanted, but could I really? So I really did experience coercive control. It was the first moment that I realized, like, wow, this is actually so much deeper if I didn't even realize it even years out. It's wild.
So true, so true. And you know what you're really describing is the coercion part, where someone will slowly coerce you to believing one thing or feeling one way or responding in a certain way only by their tactics, right? So his tactic was to tell you, you know, this is what a good wife or a girlfriend is, right? And you were coerced slowly to actually agree to that, even if that, you know, you probably didn't go out with your friends as much if he made it a point to create this understanding. It wasn't, you know, and that's the point, right? Is they're very insidious. They're so really savvy at what they do. I teach every single semester to college social work students on the power and control wheel. Well, in the power and control wheel, it has physical abuse. So every time I taught about it, I could have checked off everything else on that list, but I didn't, because I wasn't suffering physical violence, I didn't think I was a victim, right? Until I actually understood. Yeah.
It's all abuse. Now, you've called it the foundation of all abuse. Tell me where that comes from. I completely agree, by the way, but talk a little bit about that.
Well, there are some people who are like saying post-separation abuse and coercive control, or domestic violence and coercive control. In my perfect world, we just call it all coercive control because it's all of the tactics that abusers use. They may use psychological tactics. They virtually always use financial abuse. They may use legal abuse. They virtually always use the children when the children are engaged in the process, right? The reality is that all of these things, think about racism, think about sexism, think about, groups of people who are being oppressed somewhere. What is it really about? Think about what happens in intimate relationships, but it also happens in systems. Who are the most powerful people in our medical system? Who are the most powerful people in our school systems, right? Who are the most powerful people who create policy and legislation that impact all of us all the time? It's about trying to coerce someone to be a certain way and thereby control them. That's what it's about. I mean, child abuse, sex trafficking, all of these things are about someone exerting power. And the grooming tactics, I always say this, not all coercive controllers are pedophiles, but all pedophiles are using the same exact grooming tactics as a coercive controller. How do I engage you in a trusting relationship where you think I'm a decent human being? And then slowly over time, I wear away your autonomy, your ability to really know what feels right, what feels good. And then from there, I'm able to further control you and oftentimes use intimidation. And again, to your point, intimidation doesn't have to be overt. It doesn't have to be, I'll kill you. It can just be, I'm pretty sure that if I left this person, they might try to take more custodial time from me.
I remember feeling that fear, actually. I said to my sister once, if this ends, this is going to be bad. I felt it. I just knew. I was afraid, which is odd because generally I hadn't been afraid in the relationship. It was this moment of like, But I think I was also realizing so much about how things had happened. And I always use this sort of like silly example, but it's so true. And this is how small it can be. I like long hair personally, so I would always keep my hair long. However, I also knew that I couldn't, even if I wanted to, cut my hair because he wouldn't approve of that. And again, would he like physically stop me? No, but would he relentlessly mock me and make it clear that he didn't like that and make it really... So I knew, right? Those women with short hair that look like lesbians or that look like men, or if I wore lipstick, I looked like a clown. So it's not that I wasn't allowed to, but I would be made fun of. And it was sort of these suggestions, like I'm talking about, that it can be very subtle. I recognize that it's not always subtle, but I think what makes it so insidious is that sometimes you're like, well, no, he's not controlling at all. And he is.
Right. I mean, the fact that you didn't see it until someone really pointed it out to you is quite incredible. And it's an example of how abusers choose like people who are going to be more agreeable and accommodating and want to just make things work. We like to make the world work like on autopilot. We don't want to disrupt apple carts here. But you said something important because it's still intimidation when somebody makes statements about other people's short hair.
Yes.
Right? It's intimidation to you, right? It's diminishing of you and your ability to have agency in your life, right? And you also, it's really important to highlight this. If you're in a relationship and somebody's mocking you, that's a number one sign. That's a number one sign that someone is going to take something about you that is either a strength or even a weakness, a vulnerability of sorts, and use it and make fun of you. Ask yourself, when there's a conversation going on and people are laughing, is it funny to you? Because if it's not funny to you, that's mockery.
Mine did that quite a bit, actually. And I remember these arguments of like, why do the jokes always have to be at my expense? Why is it always mocking me? And then it was, of course, you're just sensitive. And of course, we lead into the gaslighting and all that. But I think a lot of women are like, that's just his sense of humor, or, he's just old fashioned, or he just loves me so much. The way that these abusers can really frame the control as care. I have a client, in fact, whose husband essentially had her location at all times. The children are location at all times. And he knows where she is. There's a camera coming in and out of the house. There's cameras in the house, and it's all for her protection. And she spent her whole marriage as a good Christian wife, feeling like her husband really loved her and was caring for her and protecting her, only to really come to terms with like, actually, he knows my every move and I have not 1 inch of privacy.
Right.
It's terrifying.
Yeah, it is terrifying. And I think once you see it, it's really hard to not see it anymore. It's hard to unsee it. And that's a good thing, but that's also a place that's very frightening, and radically accepting who this person is, the person you've been in love with or you've been partnered with for a long period of time, and recognizing that they actually have malevolent intent. And that's people say to me, I'm a little bit, maybe they say this might be dramatic, but there are people in the world who have malicious intent. Their lives are spent trying very hard to cover up who they are. And they project all of their insecurities onto others. And in that, they create this space where they have total control over someone's life. And that in and of itself is, of course, intentional and harmful, right? We lose ourselves in these relationships.
I definitely did. And I know so many of my clients did too. What makes women, I think, see this as devotion and love instead of control? Like, what do you think we're kind of telling ourselves, especially early on? What are we missing?
Oh, so important. This is really important. So from a clinical perspective, there's a term called subjugation, which I'm sure most of your listeners have heard of. But as women in society, in a patriarchal society that harms both boys and girls, we are brought up to be caretakers. We are brought up typically to follow the rules. What do we think about women who don't follow the rules, right? So society's structure is set up a certain way, and then add in that we're born a certain way. We all have traits. And if we have these automatic, caretaking traits on top of that, right? And then add in our childhood home. What were we taught as little girls and little boys? Little boys have to be strong. They can't cry. They have to be, and girls, you need to take care of that. You need to, you need to make sure that, everybody's happy. You're a people pleaser, right? So then that sets people up. And that's why I always talk about, as you know, probably that, my particular niche is the experiences of children, because who more is readily controlled and more readily wants to please their parents? I mean, this is the absolute perfect dynamic for an abuser. We have a lot of people who are going, talking about, and it's very important, children's voices need to be heard in court. Okay, that's true. But I can tell you that more than half of my clients, their children, if told to tell the truth, would lie to protect themselves.
Yes.
And so the truth from a child is not necessarily the truth. And so they're so coerced, they're so petrified, right? They know who has more power in the relationship dynamic. They know that perhaps the dad or the mom has more power, and they know that if they do not acquiesce to what that person says, there is going to be retaliation. And they've witnessed that retaliation with the protective parent. They've seen how that abuser behaves. They hear when they go to visit the abuser, your mom, she's kind of like, she's not really smart. So, or whatever it is. It's like these little, and to your point, it could be set up in a very warm, caring way. Oh, I'm just worried about your mom. She seems to be a little bit, tired lately. I wonder what's going on, or she seems to be working a lot of hours. I'm so worried about her. And all that's doing is creating opportunities for the child to feel less safe.
It's such a devastating thing for families to go through, for women, for children. I mean, for anybody that's experiencing it, obviously, but it changes how you see yourself. I always felt like I saw myself as a strong, independent woman and making my own decisions, and to look in hindsight and realize that this shaped how I saw relationships. It shaped how I saw myself, my freedoms, the gaslighting, and honestly, the fear of anger. I feel like the consequence is one of the scariest parts, because obviously some women experience physical violence as a consequence of not falling in line. And I did actually, but for me personally, I thought it was much worse to experience the mocking and the belittling or the withdrawal. I think there was a lot of like, well, if you want to go out with your friends and gallivant around, then do you. If you want to choose that over me, then go ahead. The dismissiveness of that. And then you're like, oh no, but I try. And you seek connection with somebody that's mocking you and controlling you. It's horrible.
It is. It is. And what you're pointing to is that our brains really, what we know is that from research now, is that the trauma from suffering abuse that no one can really identify or see. When you have a bruise, people immediately respond in a different way, right? But when you're trying to explain the person that everybody in town loves, or, the person that makes the greatest homemade pizza or whatever it is, and you're trying to explain what's going on, and you can't even explain it because you're confused and overwhelmed, that's really significant. And that trauma is more, and that's, what we say, right, is that physical violence is absolutely horrifying, but it's the violence that no one can see that is so much more harmful to the brain. And that's the whole, like, back to the kiddos, right, is that, we make assumptions that just because a parent hasn't been physically abusive, that the children are safe with that parent. And nobody's looking at the underpinning of it all is coercive control. This parent is coercing and controlling the child, is coercing everybody in the family system. And when children have to grow up in family systems where they can't let go and just be themselves, just relax, be authentic, if they can't be their authentic selves, then that does not actually guide them towards secure attachment. And attachment is vital to healthy development. It's vital. So we have a whole world of children who are forced into custodial time with abusers, and nobody's acknowledging their abusers. And frankly, even if they were, quote unquote, physically violent to the child or to the mother, the court doesn't really care as long as it's happened a period of time outside of a window, maybe 3 or 6 months ago. As long as the person has gotten therapy, they must be better. They must be healed.
Give them the chance. I know. I wish more people understood that this type of personality, and I somewhat mean narcissism, and I somewhat just mean a person who is predatory, exploitative, manipulative. I don't really care about labels and diagnoses, but this type of person who is a coercive controller, they don't change. There's no parenting program or anger management program that I think is really going to change it, because they benefit so much from this type of behavior. Why would they stop? It's not going to happen.
No, that's so important for people to listen to, because if there's a pattern of behavior in your relationship where someone is in any way diminishing you, counter-parenting, gaslighting, manipulation, in any way doing any of these things, and you think you're going to change them, or you can go to therapy. I just got an email yesterday or the day before from a woman who said, I really just want to go to family therapy with my husband. I think he's a narcissist, but I want to go to therapy. And I want to say, sweetheart, yeah, going to therapy with him, he's not going to change. And so a lot of people hold on to the hope, right? And that's one of the characteristics of victims. They're highly agreeable, optimistic, loyal to a fault, like just so loyal. They're going to keep trying. And so knowing that that is the perfect setup for someone to abuse you, right?
Yep. There's a nice, perfect little cocktail there, right? When we feel the hope and we're attached to the potential and we think we love them, even though we're probably stuck in a trauma bond. I know not everybody experiences that, but regardless, that attachment to a person who hurts you, it's so unhealthy, but I get it. Like maybe they can change, maybe. And that's the thing, is it kind of feeds right into it, because maybe if I just love him harder, or maybe I should just not go out with my friends too much. Maybe this is normal. A lot of men will sort of pitch this like, but you're my wife and this makes sense and this is what marriage is. They get you to not talk to your friends about it, right? Don't slander me out in the world. And of course, that sounds logical. And I think fundamentally is logical to not slander your spouse, but it's like, where's the line? If it's abuse, you should talk about it. If it's not abuse, it's just an argument. But the people in this don't know that it's abuse. You think that it is just an argument. So you're not going to share it with people.
Right. And so that's why the word that Dr. Evan Stark uses, right, is that it's a pattern of behavior. And so I say a pattern is one more than one. And so if something's happened once and your spouse mocked you at a dinner party and you were really upset about it and you talked with them and they said, oh gosh, I'm really sorry, I won't do that again. Or they mocked you again and told you we're too sensitive. Well, there we go. We got a pattern, right? So, and then the next time you go out, it happens again, or it doesn't happen for a month. That's okay. It happens 2 months later. Ask yourself, wait a minute, there is a pattern of behavior going on. And so I always, listen, is the relationship built on equality, or is one person holding all of the power or more of the power? Because healthy relationships are built on equality and mutuality, which means I feel entirely safe with you and you feel entirely safe with me. And ask, like any of your clients, I'm sure, and my clients, did you feel safe? Like that you could be yourself, that you could just let go, that you could scream and yell and not have it held against you today, but you're not going to do that as a pattern of behavior, right? And then tomorrow, you're going to be able to go out to dinner with your friends. Like, can you just be you?
And I think we don't recognize that we've lost ourselves because so much of this is slow conditioning. I see a lot of women experience this sort of self-policing, right? So he doesn't have to tell you anything anymore because you're falling into line. it's sort of the result of it. Do you see that with your clients, that sort of self-policing?
100%. And I'm usually seeing clients after they've left or when they are trying to leave and it's mostly around custody and children, et cetera, right? But yeah, have there been clients where, they're really stuck? And that's what Dr. Stark's analogy, I talk about it in my TEDx, is coercive control is like carpenter ants devouring the foundation of a house. You don't even know it's happening until it's too late. And so it's a slow burn. It's an insidious slow burn. And again, if there's physical violence, then at least that helps us, sadly, to say, whoa, something's going on. I had one incident of physical violence in my relationship with my ex, and I completely forgot about it for about 25 years. Completely forgot about it because it never happened again. And I'm going to say this sounds silly. It was just a slap across the face. And so in my mind, I probably caused it back then. That's what I was thinking, right? And so I kind of forgot about it. But I think he learned, oh, wait, if I do this like that, some abusers figure out that if they do that, that maybe he knew that I would report him. Maybe he knew, but if he just kept it under the radar, I wouldn't be as likely to report it, right?
I talk about this on my channels, right? The plausible deniability. I think that so much of this operates within that of that the ability for the abuser to say, but I never told you you couldn't go. How am I controlling when I said you could go? How am I controlling? I let you do whatever you want. How am I controlling? You're in charge of the money, but it's still coercive control, but they hide.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I love that. Yeah, because when you think about who would think that thoroughly about how I can manipulate a situation, again, malevolent intent. There's no doubt about it, right? And so we know that virtually everybody who, first of all, the most violent cases of, unfortunately, femicide and filicide are the pattern of behavior started well before that incident happened. These are not just something happens and there's a homicide, or a femicide is a murder of a woman, right? So it's happened well before. It was a pattern of behavior that was escalating. There were police calls. There were all kinds of behaviors that were very indicative of somebody trying to control you. Yet the systems don't acknowledge it, right? And that's why victims don't call. That's why victims stay silent. Yeah.
That is absolutely true. I think women so much doubt their own judgment. And it makes sense because you want to believe the best in your partner. You want to believe that things aren't that bad, that he's just angry, or that it's just his personality, or just a preference, or just a boundary, something. Because I think to face this is abuse, it means too much. It's too big for some women. What do you think they're sort of experiencing psychologically that makes it so hard to face? This is control.
I'm going to go back to your suggestions word, because that's really a really great word to use, right? So what do you want me to do? What would make you happy? So in other words, now all I want is to not argue, maybe, right? Or all I want is to be able to go out with friends and not be stonewalled. But now it seems like I'm dissatisfied, that I'm never happy. You're never happy, right? And so there's something wrong with me. And so abusers want to make sure that you know that there's something wrong with you. You are the problem. And we are the type, going back to the earlier part of the conversation where subjugation, we are the type of people who want to fix ourselves. You tell me that I did something to offend you, I'm going to be like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean that, right? I'm going to take responsibility. I'm going to be accountable. And so that's what they're banking on, that I'm just going to keep putting this on her, and then she's going to take responsibility. And then maybe next time she won't go out.
I know for me, when I think about it, we worked different schedules. So I worked, office hours during the day, and he worked a lot of evenings. So it left me free and available to go out with friends. But it was that praise of where I went. It was, I love that you just hang out at their houses and go to dinner. You're not out gallivanting around. But even when we would go out to dinner, I learned that I had to keep my phone on the table, face up, ready to get a text message, ready to get a call, and that I had to answer. So I went from sort of oh, it's in my purse, I didn't see it, to no, I'm available, I'll answer, because there was a consequence. And that compliance that we just get conditioned into, you don't even realize. You think, well, he just needs me to be available. What's the big deal? You don't realize it. Yeah, he loves me. He misses
He's worried about me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's
and
garbage.
it's interesting. You're sitting at a table with girlfriends, right? And everybody's having a feeling about this. But the question becomes, does anybody say anything, right?
No.
And right, people think it's not their business, and they don't want to lose you as a friend, right? They don't want you to get angry and not come back out or whatever. So they just kind of accept it. And I think that that's part of the problem, is that there's not a standard understanding that we all need to be more vocal about this, because this is what the abuser hopes. The abuser hopes that everybody is too uncomfortable to say anything, that you're too uncomfortable to say anything, and now he's got carte blanche. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. That whole kind of concept of like stay out of people's business, mind your own business. I think abuse is my business. But it's a leap for some people to be like, so your husband calls you too much, so he loves you. You're mad at that. And it's like, oh, that's not, it's people really feed into this. I wish my husband did that. I even get people online saying like, oh, wow, you got an apology? Lucky you. No, I got fake apologies. Lucky me. That's bizarre. Just because your abuser didn't give you flowers and my abuser gave me flowers, we're both abuse victims here. Like nobody's winning.
That's right.
I'm not winning because I got flowers. I promise.
It's tricky. It's tricky, and I think, back to like to the idea that these friends don't know what to do. They don't know what to say. And then when we finally disclose, but then the trauma bond keeps us going back sometimes, right? So you go back, you're disclosed, but then you go back. Now there's shame because you're feeling really ashamed of the fact that actually you shared so much about how horrible the relationship was, but then you also went back to the person. So what's wrong with you, right? I mean,
Yep.
and that's why I think this online world in general has become just such a great space, because I don't know about you, but back in the day, I'm older than you, back in the day, there were not a lot of places for people to go. I mean, you could go to the local agency, but now you can go online and other people are experiencing it.
That community part is huge. I know so many people who in comment sections will say, where were you 20 years ago? And I mean, I wasn't experiencing this 20 years ago, so I didn't know anything about it. But I love the explosion of people talking about this. More clinicians are trained in this. More clinicians are online talking about it. More coaches. There's more awareness, more YouTube videos, more books. It's incredible, actually. I'm glad that there is more resources for people. But it also has felt at times to me like, is this more prevalent now? But no, we're just talking about it more. I don't actually think it is more prevalent now than ever before. I think that we're talking about it now. We're not accepting it anymore, where women used to have no choice but to accept it because you're completely trapped. Now at least you can recognize it, see something, see a video online and be like, oh my God, this is happening to me. And then get resources and learn about coercive control, financial abuse, physical abuse, the power and control wheel, all of it. The power and control wheel is what made me realize it was abuse too.
Yeah. I mean, and that from the Duluth model was created in a focus group where women came forward and talked about their experiences, and they weren't just talking about physical violence. And that's what Dr. Evan Stark talked about. He said, listen, the worst part for the woman wasn't when he and his wife, Ann, opened up their home to victims in New Haven, Connecticut. And he said, the worst part, they would tell me over and over again, wasn't the physical violence. It was the fear of what would happen next. And so 98, I think it's obviously closer to 100%. It's so damn close, but 98% of victims of coercive control suffer post-separation abuse. It does get worse, yet we tell victims to leave all the time. It does get worse. And so, it's really about, figuring out what's best for you. And I know you agree, we can't judge anyone who decides to stay, because sometimes staying feels safer. It just, even if it's not safe, it feels safer. And that's a tricky thing, because then you have kids and you have all these situations where you're trying to live your life, a normal life, but you're not living a normal life. You're living a life where your body is feeling all of this.
It is. I think, people don't talk enough about the post-separation part of this, and it's not necessarily the whole topic, but you can't ignore the fact that just leave, even if you take out the word just and make it, acknowledge how hard it is to actually leave for emotional reasons, familial reasons, financial reasons, all of those things. Post-separation can be worse. Stalking, of course, there's custody issues and all that, but even just stalking, the fear, showing up to your work, begging you back, showing up to your door with flowers on their hands and knees, promising change, scaring you, telling you that they'll unalive your next partner if you ever date another man again. It's terrifying. It is enough to scare women back into the relationship or to never leave in the first place, because he doesn't hit me. He's just a little bit controlling. It's not that bad, right? Because you think about what could be worse after, and knowing the stats about violence escalating when you leave. I think people as a collective don't realize the difficulty in leaving. It seems like, okay, I know it's hard, but leave. I don't think you know it's hard if that's how you're describing it.
I mean, super challenging. And also, to your point, like financial abuse can really decimate someone where they know that they are losing everything. And because that's what ends up happening oftentimes in court is that the abusers have more power, they have more money. And so how do you let go a little bit and actually have to rebuild your life all over again, which that's just it's very sad. So there's the amount of loss that occurs. It's not just the loss of that primary relationship or a loss of who you thought you had married or partnered with, or the loss of the custodial time with your kids, maybe instead of having, and most of the time you go down to 50-50. There's so much loss here. It's actually quite surprising to me how many people are able to escape and get back on their feet, because it's probably, and it goes back to, it's interesting when you think about patriarchal norms that have been in place for so long historically. I teach social work, and we were talking just yesterday in my class about lobotomies, neurosurgery, which actually works very successfully now for some people with OCD, which is really quite incredible. But the first people who were receiving lobotomies were women who the husband said, she wasn't listening to me. She didn't follow the rules, or she's, being challenging at home. And they found that by doing these neurosurgeries on women that they were calmer after. Well, because they literally became brain damaged. That's the world. That's the foundational structure of our world everywhere. This isn't an attack on men. This is an attack on how these norms were created that gave, again, abusers. We've unfortunately lived in a world where not all boys are being raised in a way to honor and respect themselves and, of course, respect others.
You are absolutely right. I've always been a feminist, but I didn't feel like it was appropriate for my brand. Like I talk about abuse and trauma bonds. So talking about patriarchy and feminism is different. I can't see it that way anymore. I made this connection, which to me in hindsight seems so obvious, but I made this connection of like, how do you separate the two? Because why does abusiveness happen? Where do people feel so entitled to use coercive control? And you can't talk about this without talking about patriarchy, without feminism and how people are raised, gender norms. It's all part of it. You think about something you've talked a lot about, right? This perfect prey. Why are women like that? What has shaped this view of women and how we're supposed to behave? How do we not talk about that? But on that topic, tell us about this perfect prey, because a lot of women want to know, like, what is it about me that makes these people attracted to me?
Well, I would say that children are perfect prey. So anybody who is just wanting to feel unconditional love and to be accepted for who they are. And because of that, in particular, I think a lot of women work really hard at relationships, and again, this highly agreeable, empathic, Sandra Brown from the Institute of Relationship Studies talks about them as super traits. So imagine if everybody on the planet was actually giving and kind and optimistic, not perfect, by the way, not perfect, but optimistic, empathic, loyal, worked hard at things. Imagine, like that would be pretty cool. It'd be pretty amazing. And so the problem is that those traits that are absolutely wonderful are traits that also are very readily boundary crossed. And so a victim is unfortunately, and children in particular, that's what children are, right? I remember as a child hearing this absolutely horrible analogy, but a beaten dog will go back to his owner all the time, right? And so we know that about animals, our beautiful fur babies. Same thing happens with our children, right? That very often they just want to believe the best in their parents. Even if I have a mom, I have many moms, but like this one example of like a 12-year-old who was physically assaulted by his father. His father was arrested. By the time he was 14, he was living with his father. He had totally disassociated from the harm, totally trauma bonded, absolutely trauma bonded. So women are perfect prey, children are perfect prey. And I would say again that patriarchy harms little boys. We live in a world where they're getting so much disinformation, it's just not even helpful, and the information is harming them. So we've got a lot of work to do. That's why we need more people doing this work.
I always feel like there's so much space in this industry of abuse and domestic violence to be loud about this. And I know that not everybody can speak about it. And I feel like I speak certainly on behalf of myself, but of the women who can't or who choose not to for their own reasons, which is perfectly fine for people to do. I want to take you to a little section of this called Real Talk from the Comments. I want to read you a couple of comments left by people on my page when I talk about coercive control and control. Just kind of get your reaction to these comments. This is what people think, right? This is what some people think in the world about the concept of control. So I'll read you the first comment. If a woman loves her husband, she shouldn't have a problem doing what makes him comfortable. That's what keeps a marriage strong. My wife knows that I don't like her hanging out with certain friends, and she doesn't. That's just mutual respect. We don't need outsiders calling it abuse.
I want to talk to her. I want to find out if she's doing it to make him happy, to appease him, or if it truly makes her happy.
So many of these comments, my response is always like, is your wife okay? Or you see a profile picture and it's like a man with his daughter and you're like, really? Oh my God. This is bad. Yeah. That's coercive control. I think it's a perfect example, right? My wife knows what I like and what I don't like, and so she just doesn't, and it's called respect.
You too.
It's called coercive control.
That voiceover was perfect.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So true. The other comment, also horrible. God, this is why men don't want to date anymore. Everything we do is suddenly abuse. You can't even have preferences without being labeled controlling.
That's not true, though. People could have preferences. Honey, I don't want to go out tonight, but you go out without me. That's a preference, right? Or, honey, I'm not really keen on that girlfriend. I don't like hanging out with that girlfriend of yours, but you go out and enjoy your time with her, right? But that's different than control. Control is, I hate your girlfriend, or I love this one. My ex used to tell me people didn't like me. So, yeah, right? Yeah. Oh, well, she did say that about the outfit you were wearing the other night. Are you sure you want to go out with her? That's control, right? So, yeah, I mean, I'd love to spend Friday night home with you. That's fine. But if it's every Friday night and you have plans and somebody's sabotaging your plans, that's a problem, right? How many times has your partner taken your plans and sabotaged them? How many times?
Right? Have you lost count?
Again, and if it's more than once, it's a pattern.
Right.
Right. And so understanding that as time goes on in these relationships, we get so worn down that we may have started off with our boundaries out here, and now all of a sudden we're in a little box. Ask yourself, are you in a box now? Are you able to express yourself? Are you able to play your music? Are you able to dance in the kitchen if you want to? Able to not cook dinner tonight? What are the things, right? And I also, just to highlight that a lot of people think financial abuse is like, you don't have access to money, or you're on a strict budget, or you can't do X, Y, or Z. A lot of times financial abuse is you're the workhorse. So my brother called me, you're the workhorse, Christine. You're doing all the work. And then the abuser doesn't contribute their fair share into the account, but then they tell you that they did. It's all gaslighting, right? I think that's the important thing, right? Lisa says we need to be intentionally thinking about the parts of the relationship that are transformative, that make us feel good, that add to our life, and the parts of the relationship that are simply transactional.
That's so important, to really reflect on your relationship. Marriage isn't perfect. Relationships aren't perfect. But this whole kind of idea of like, maybe everybody's partner screams at them sometimes. No, that's not true. You can have a disagreement, you can have preferences. But I think too, the concept of even the example that person was sort of alluding to in that comment, preferences. Right now, you make it seem like the person, the victim in the relationship is not understanding that they have preferences, or that the victim is controlling. I was called controlling so often because I said, like you say you're going to be home in 20 minutes and you come home 11 hours late, and then you accuse me of trying to give you a curfew and call me controlling. And it's like, I think it's normal to know where your partner is in 9 a.m. the next day when they said they'd be home in 20 minutes. Do you know what I mean? Like it's so, but so I'm not allowed to go out. And they really twist things.
They do. The Darvo is very true, right? They deny, attack, and reverse. They become the victim. You're controlling of me when they're the one who's been controlling all along. And maybe now you do want them home tonight on Friday night because last Friday night you caught them cheating on you, right?
Right. So like maybe you're, but I would say that's not even control. That's like insecurity, which is justified as opposed to this made up insecurity. Like my ex-girlfriend cheated on me, so you can't go out with your friends, but it all sounds so plausible. And again, I feel like that's kind of the point here, is that it hides behind, this is my boundary, or hey, I just have a preference that my wife doesn't go out with her friends ever. And it's not, it's control. So I want us to sort of cut through some of the language and find these patterns that you're talking about, because this is, if you don't feel free, there's something wrong.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
If you can't be yourself, if you can't relax, if you're walking on eggshells, if you're being made fun of and it just, there's supposed to be a joke and it doesn't feel good. If somebody's used a vulnerability against you, told them something in private that really bothered you and they exposed it or used it in an argument, that's not fair fighting. That's abuse.
So thank you so much for being here. Can you tell us a little bit about where people can find you, interact with you, check out your books? Tell us a little bit more about that.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so I'm at coercivecontrolconsulting.com or iknowyourheart.com. And my specific work, although I work with victims of all ages, but I do work with moms in particular and dads. I have some male clients, but really trying to help them focus on reigniting attachment with children who are living in these circumstances. Abusers work maliciously to fracture attachment, and my goal is to help protective parents reignite and fortify that attachment. So I have a community online. I have the protective parenting program where I teach protective parents this. Co-author of the book Framed, Woman in the Family Court Underworld, who really, women in family court are just really, unfortunately, in bad circumstances. And I have a new children's book coming out every moment of every day next week, actually, sometime after this recording. And it's about how to help our children regulate when they actually are coming back from the abuser's house and or when they don't want to go. And it's a story about a little boy and his mom and a little girl and her mom too, a little girl and her mom. So, yeah. So
What a
somatic
necessary
experiencing.
book.
Yeah. How to help them regulate and what a mother can do during these periods of time when things are really challenging. Transitions can be super challenging.
Amazing. Well, I hope people go and follow you and interact with your content and definitely get your books. That's so amazing. Thank you again for being here.
Thank you.